The day of my sister Madison's wedding was supposed to be filled with love, laughter, and family. Instead, it became the moment everything I thought I knew about my family shattered. I was standing near the aisle, adjusting Madison's veil in the glow of chandeliers, when my father's voice suddenly cut through the music like a blade. "Security! Chase that old man out of here! Now!" My blood ran cold. Every guest turned, murmurs rippling across the grand Beverly Hills ballroom. My eyes darted toward the man he meant, my grandfather, William, the only person who had ever treated me with unwavering kindness. 2 guards approached, the tension so thick I could barely breathe. My father folded his arms, confident, smirking, certain they would obey. But then one of the guards shook his head and whispered words that froze the entire room. "We can't. He's a VIP. People always say weddings bring families together. For us, it only exposed every fracture we'd been ignoring for years." My father, Richard, loved appearances more than anything. To him, image was currency measured in luxury cars, perfect table settings, and powerful friends. He had worked his way into Los Angeles's elite circles, but in doing so, he shoved my grandfather, William, to the sidelines. Growing up, I noticed it in the smallest things. At dinner, Dad would scoff whenever Grandpa shared stories about building his company from scratch. "Nobody cares about the past, old man," he'd sneer. "The future belongs to people like me." Grandpa would smile gently, never firing back, but I could see the hurt flicker in his eyes. As the wedding approached, tension wrapped around our house like a storm cloud. Madison was the perfect bride, glowing and graceful, desperate to keep the peace. But peace was impossible when Richard kept making jabs at Grandpa. One evening, a week before the ceremony, I walked into the living room and heard Dad's voice low and sharp. "He shouldn't even be there, Madison. Do you really want your wedding photos ruined by some wrinkled old man sitting at the front row?" Madison gasped. "Dad, how can you say that? He's family. He's my grandfather." Richard waved a dismissive hand. "He's outdated. He doesn't belong in the world I've built for us. This wedding is about reputation. And William, he drags us down." I couldn't stay quiet. I stepped forward, my fists clenched. "Maybe the problem isn't him, Dad. Maybe the problem is you being ashamed of where you came from." Richard's eyes snapped to mine, his face hardening. "Careful, Chloe. You're young, you don't understand what it takes to survive in this city. Respect isn't given, it's bought. Your grandfather never understood that." Grandpa, who had been sitting quietly in his armchair, finally spoke. His voice was calm, steady, like steel hidden in velvet. "Richard, respect is earned, not purchased. You've forgotten that. But life has a way of reminding us." The silence that followed was suffocating. Dad's jaw tightened, and he stormed out, leaving Madison in tears. I sat beside Grandpa, holding his hand. He squeezed mine gently and whispered, "Don't worry, Chloe. The truth always comes out sometimes louder than we expect." At that moment, I didn't realize just how prophetic his words would be. The rehearsal dinner should have been warm, light-hearted, a time for toasts, laughter, and family memories. Instead, it felt like a chessboard where every move carried hidden motives. The long mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier. Crystal glasses caught the light, and the silverware was so polished I could see my own reflection. Madison sat at the head table with her fiancé, trying to mask the tension with a strained smile. Beside her, Richard looked like a king surveying his kingdom. Grandpa William sat quietly near the end of the table, dignified yet strangely out of place, his modest suit a sharp contrast to the designer tuxedos around him. As the waiter poured wine, Dad leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass. His voice dripped with contempt as he said, "You know, not everyone here really belongs in this crowd." His eyes flicked toward Grandpa. Madison stiffened. "Dad, please," he cut her off with a smirk. "I mean, look at this. Tech executives, venture capitalists, families that built empires. And then, him." He jabbed his finger toward William as if he were an unwelcome guest, an old man clinging to outdated ideals. The room went silent. I felt heat rising to my cheeks. "He's your father," I snapped. "Show some respect." Richard barked a bitter laugh. "Respect? Don't talk to me about respect, Chloe. Respect doesn't come from age, it comes from status, from money, from power. Your grandfather doesn't understand that. He never did. Grandpa placed his fork down gently, his hands steady even as the air bristled with tension. His voice, calm and firm, carried across the table. You're wrong, Richard. True power is not what people see when you flash your wealth. It's what they feel when you show them kindness. That's something you've forgotten. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded subtly, clearly uncomfortable with Richard's cruelty. But my father only sneered deeper, leaning forward. Kindness doesn't pay for weddings. Kindness doesn't impress senators or CEOs. Look around you, old man. This world runs on influence, not fairy tales. Madison slammed her napkin down, her voice trembling. Stop it. This is supposed to be a happy night. You're embarrassing me, and yourself. But Richard only lifted his glass in a mock toast. To progress, he declared coldly. And to leaving the past behind, where it belongs. I couldn't breathe. My sister sat frozen in humiliation, my grandfather's quiet dignity standing in painful contrast to my father's arrogance. The rehearsal dinner ended in suffocating silence, and for the first time, I wondered if tomorrow's wedding would bring more disgrace than joy. And deep down, I feared I already knew the answer. The wedding day arrived wrapped in golden California sunlight. From the outside, everything looked perfect. White roses spiraled up the marble columns, a string quartet played soft melodies, and guests shimmered in gowns and tuxedos that screamed wealth. Madison looked like a dream in her ivory silk dress, her smile wide but trembling at the edges. I stood at her side, adjusting her veil one last time before she walked down the aisle. For a moment, I wanted to believe the night before hadn't happened, that our family could hold itself together for just this one day. But the illusion shattered the moment Richard entered the ballroom. His stride was sharp, his expression taut. He greeted guests with practiced charm, but his eyes darted toward the back where Grandpa William sat quietly. His presence was impossible to ignore. Even in his simple suit, Grandpa carried a dignity that outshone the glittering chandeliers. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Isn't that William Carter?" someone murmured. "The investor who disappeared years ago?" another asked. Heads turned, eyes widened, and suddenly my grandfather, the man Richard wanted to erase, had become the unspoken center of attention. I saw the muscle in Dad's jaw twitch. He hated it. Hated that in a room full of billionaires and influencers, people were whispering about his father instead of him. As Madison began her slow walk down the aisle, the tension thickened. I could almost hear Richard's thoughts buzzing like static. Control, image, power. He kept glancing at Grandpa, his face tightening with every whisper that reached his ears. I leaned close to Madison and whispered, "Don't worry, just focus on today, on you." She gave me a shaky smile, but her eyes flickered nervously toward our father. The officiant's voice rose, welcoming everyone, but beneath the elegant words I felt an undercurrent, a storm brewing just below the surface. Grandpa sat serenely, hands folded, as if he knew exactly what was coming. I couldn't shake the feeling. The way Dad's eyes burned, the way his fists clenched at his sides, it was only a matter of time. He wasn't going to let this pass quietly. Not today. Not with all these powerful people watching. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm. But deep in my chest, dread coiled tighter and tighter. Something was about to snap, and when it did, none of us would ever forget it. The vows hadn't even begun when I saw it happen. Dad's mask of politeness slipped, and in its place came raw fury. He'd been glaring at Grandpa from the moment Madison stepped onto the aisle, but now the whispers in the crowd had grown too loud to ignore. People weren't admiring the flowers or the decor. They were murmuring about William Carter, the billionaire recluse who had suddenly appeared. Richard's pride couldn't take it. He shot to his feet, his chair screeching against the marble floor. Gasps erupted, as his voice thundered across the ballroom, louder than the quartet, louder than the officiant, louder than Madison's soft intake of breath. "Security! Chase that old man out of here. Do you hear me? Chase him out now!" The words echoed, harsh and ugly, tearing through the elegant atmosphere like a blade. Every head turned. Guests froze mid-whisper, their champagne glasses trembling in their hands. Madison's veil fluttered as she stumbled a step, her eyes wide with horror. "Dad, stop!" she cried, her voice breaking. But Richard's face was crimson with rage. "This is my daughter's wedding. I will not have it ruined by him. Guards, remove that man immediately." Two security guards in dark suits began moving down the aisle. The air was electric, charged with disbelief. I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. I stepped forward, my voice shaking but fierce. "He's your father, Dad. How can you humiliate him like this?" Richard snapped toward me, his finger stabbing the air. "Stay out of this, Chloe. You don't understand. He doesn't belong here. He never did. He's an embarrassment." The crowd gasped again. Some guests exchanged awkward glances, others whispered in shocked tones. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just a family argument anymore, it was a public execution of dignity. Grandpa, however, didn't flinch. He sat still, his expression calm, eyes steady. When the guards reached him, he rose slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate grace. His voice was quiet, but carried through the silence. "If your pride means more to you than family, Richard, then perhaps it is you who doesn't belong here." The words hit like a slap. Madison covered her mouth to stifle a sob. Richard's voice cracked as he bellowed again. "Out. I said out." The guards hesitated. They looked at one another, their brows furrowed. I caught it just a flicker of doubt, but it was enough. The ballroom held its breath. One guard leaned toward the other, whispering words that carried farther than he intended. "We can't. He's a VIP." The silence that followed was deafening. It was as if the chandeliers themselves stopped glowing. The music strangled mid-note. Richard blinked, stunned. "What did you just say?" The guard straightened, his face professional, his voice firmer this time. "We can't remove Mr. Carter. He's on the VIP list. Hotel policy." The room erupted not with cheers, not yet, but with sharp, shocked whispers. Guests craned their necks, murmuring, "VIP? William Carter?" My father's triumph collapsed in an instant. His smirk faltered, his jaw slackened. For the first time that day, Richard looked small. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, knowing this was only the beginning. The real storm hadn't even hit yet. The ballroom was so silent I could hear the faint hum of the chandeliers. Everyone waited for the guards to clarify what they'd just said. My father's face twisted in disbelief, his eyes bulging with fury. "What do you mean, VIP?" Richard barked, his voice trembling with rage. "He's nothing. He's just an old man who doesn't know his place." The taller guard, steady as a rock, stood firm. His voice was calm, professional, but carried the weight of finality. "I'm sorry, sir. Mr. William Carter is on our VIP registry. He cannot be removed. Hotel policy is explicit." The words echoed like a gavel strike. Gasps spread through the crowd. Guests leaned into one another, whispering frantically. Did he say Carter? The William Carter? The reclusive billionaire? He owns half the properties in this city. I glanced around. The very people Richard had tried so hard to impress were now staring at Grandpa in awe. Their expressions shifted from polite indifference to astonishment, respect, even admiration. Madison's bouquet trembled in her hands. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at Grandpa as if seeing him for the first time. My father's face turned crimson. He jabbed his finger toward the guards, spittle flying from his lips. "I don't care what list he's on. This is my daughter's wedding, and I give the orders here. Do you understand? Me." But the shorter guard, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his voice low but resolute. "With all due respect, sir, this hotel answers to Mr. Carter before it answers to anyone else." The collective gasp this time was louder, sharper. Richard staggered back a step, like someone had just punched the air from his lungs. Grandpa didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply stood tall, shoulders squared, his presence commanding the entire room without a single ounce of arrogance. He looked directly at Richard, his voice even and calm. "You tried to erase me, Richard. But you cannot erase truth. Respect is not forced. It's earned." The guests erupted not in cheers, but in a storm of murmurs and glances. Some nodded at Grandpa, others shook their heads at Richard in disgust. The tide had turned. I could see it in Dad's eyes. The panic. The realization that his empire of pride was crumbling in front of everyone who mattered to him. "This isn't over," he growled, his voice hoarse. Enough." Madison's voice cut through, trembling but fierce. She clutched her bouquet tighter. "Dad, you've humiliated me, humiliated yourself, and worst of all, you've tried to destroy the one person who never stopped loving us. How could you?" Her words landed harder than anything else. Guests turned toward her now, sympathy in their eyes. Tears welled in mine as I stepped closer to Grandpa, slipping my arm through his. The guards stayed firm at his side, silent but powerful symbols that the world no longer bowed to Richard. For the first time in my life, I watched my father shrink not just as a man, but as a figure of authority. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. This wedding was no longer about Madison's vows. It had become a public trial of Richard Carter's soul. And everyone was watching the verdict unfold. The ballroom felt like a stage, every pair of eyes locked on the two men at its center. My father, Richard, stood trembling with rage, his fists clenched at his sides, his face blotched red. Across from him, my grandfather William stood tall, calm as a mountain, his quiet dignity casting a shadow over Dad's bluster. "Vip?" Richard spat, his voice raw. "That's what this is about? A list? A title? He's nothing but an old man clinging to scraps of power." Grandpa's gaze never wavered. His voice was steady, almost gentle, but carried farther than a shout. "You see scraps, Richard, because you measure worth in dollars and handshakes. True power has nothing to do with lists. It has to do with legacy, with love, with family." The words landed like stones. Guests whispered, some nodding in agreement, others watching Richard unravel. Richard barked out a laugh, brittle and broken. "Family? Don't make me laugh. Family doesn't open doors in this city. Money does. Influence does. Everything I've built, you think kindness got me here?" I stepped forward before I could stop myself, my voice sharp with anger. "Everything you've built is nothing if it means stepping on your own father to get there." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard's head snapped toward me, his eyes burning. "Chloe, you have no idea how the world works. You're naive. You've been poisoned by his fantasies." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "No, I've been saved by them. Because unlike you, Grandpa knows respect isn't bought, it's earned." Madison, still clutching her bouquet, finally broke. Her voice cracked like glass. "Dad, please stop. You're tearing this apart. This is supposed to be my wedding day, and you've turned it into a circus." But Richard wouldn't listen. He stepped toward Grandpa, his voice rising, desperate. "You think you're better than me because you've got your name on some VIP list? You're nothing. You left me to figure out the world on my own, and now you stand here pretending to be some saint?" For the first time, Grandpa's composure wavered just slightly. His eyes softened, sadness flickering beneath the calm. "I never abandoned you, Richard. I gave you everything I could: an education, a foundation. What you did with it, that was your choice." Richard's lip curled. "My choice made me powerful. Your way made you invisible." Grandpa's reply was quiet, almost sorrowful. "Invisible? Or simply uninterested in flaunting myself? You think I disappeared, but I was building quietly, giving quietly. The world remembers kindness long after it forgets power plays." The silence after his words was heavier than thunder. Guests shifted, murmurs swelling louder now, not against Grandpa, but against Richard. I saw it in their eyes. Pity, disdain, disappointment. My father looked around, realizing the crowd he'd hoped to impress was slipping through his fingers. His voice broke as he shouted, "You don't understand, none of you. He's not the man you think he is." But no one believed him anymore. Grandpa turned his gaze on Madison and me, his voice softer. "What matters now is not his anger. What matters is what you two carry forward. Don't let this poison your hearts." Madison wept openly, torn between loyalty and heartbreak. I tightened my grip on Grandpa's arm, grounding him, grounding myself. And in that charged moment, I understood something. This wasn't just father versus son anymore. This was a generational verdict, a clash between greed and dignity, and the entire room had chosen its side. The ballroom buzzed with uneasy whispers, a tide of murmurs swelling with every second of silence between Richard and William. I could see the shift happening, subtle at first, then undeniable. Guests weren't just staring at Grandpa with curiosity anymore. They were staring with recognition. A man in a navy suit leaned toward his wife, his voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "That's William Carter. He founded Horizon Capital 30 years ago." Her eyes widened. "You mean the investment firm that practically built half of Silicon Valley?" Another voice chimed in from across the aisle. "I heard he quietly funds several universities. Hospitals, too. He's a legend." The realization rippled like wildfire. All around me, heads turned toward Grandpa, not as a frail old man in a modest suit, but as a titan, someone whose name carried weight in rooms my father only dreamed of entering. Richard's face drained of color. He tried to laugh, the sound brittle. "Don't be ridiculous. He walked away years ago. He's nothing now." But the shorter security guard cut in firmly, his words like nails sealing a coffin. "Sir, with respect, Mr. Carter's name is not just on the VIP registry, it's on the building itself. The Carter Foundation has been a silent partner of this hotel for over a decade." The collective gasp that followed was deafening. My knees nearly gave out. I looked up at Grandpa, who hadn't moved a muscle. He didn't bask in the attention, didn't gloat. His calm composure only made him more powerful. Madison's bouquet slipped from her trembling hands. "Grandpa? Is that true?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Grandpa gave her a small, warm smile. "Yes, sweetheart. I never thought it mattered to flaunt it. What mattered was making sure people had opportunities, even if they never knew my name." The crowd erupted into murmurs again, this time filled with awe. Several high-profile guests, executives, political figures rose from their seats and nodded respectfully toward him. One even extended a hand, as if seeking acknowledgement. Richard staggered, his bravado crumbling. No, this isn't how it's supposed to be." His voice cracked, desperate. You're trying to humiliate me." Grandpa finally looked at him directly, his eyes steady, his tone unyielding. "No, Richard, you've done that to yourself. I didn't need to lift a finger. The truth reveals who we are, and today, everyone sees you clearly." The officiant, who had stood frozen this entire time, finally cleared his throat, but the ceremony couldn't resume. The atmosphere was electric, dominated not by vows or flowers but by the collapse of my father's carefully constructed image. Madison stepped closer to Grandpa, tears streaming down her cheeks. "All this time? You never told us? Never told me? You could have changed everything." Grandpa shook his head softly. "I didn't want to change everything, darling. I wanted you to grow strong without depending on wealth. But today, perhaps it was necessary to let the truth be seen." Richard's hands trembled as he tried to salvage what little authority he had left. "You think these people respect you? They'll forget you the moment you leave. But me, I'm the one they'll remember. I'm the host, the father of the bride." But his words fell flat. Guests weren't looking at him anymore. They weren't listening. They were looking at William Carter, the quiet man Richard had tried to erase standing tall at the center of the storm. And for the first time in his life, my father looked utterly powerless. The wedding never returned to what it was supposed to be. The flowers were still beautiful, the music still played, but the heart of it had shifted. Every guest knew they had witnessed something they'd talk about for years. Not Madison's vows, but Richard Carter's collapse. My sister stood frozen at the altar, her hands trembling. She looked at our father as if she no longer recognized him. "Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. "How could you do this? On my wedding day?" Richard tried to reach for her, but she stepped back, her eyes blazing through tears. "You humiliated me. You humiliated Grandpa. And for what? To feed your pride?" The crowd watched in heavy silence. No one defended him. Not a single friend, not a single ally. The man who once commanded attention with his wealth and bluster now stood alone, shrinking under the weight of judgment. Grandpa placed a steady hand on Madison's shoulder. "Don't let anger ruin this day, sweetheart. Your love is still worth celebrating." His voice was calm, soothing, like a balm over open wounds. Madison broke down then, burying her face against his chest. The image of her in her wedding gown, clinging to our grandfather while our father stood helpless nearby, would be seared into my memory forever. I walked to Richard, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. "You always told me respect had to be bought," I said, my voice low enough for only him to hear. "But today you learned the truth. Money can't erase arrogance, and it sure as hell can't erase shame." His face crumpled, the fight gone from his eyes. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For once, Richard Carter had nothing to say. The ceremony resumed eventually, awkwardly, but it was no longer his event. It was Madison's, and in many ways, it became Grandpa's too. Guests congratulated him, whispering about the strength of the Carter legacy not through Richard, but through the man he had tried so hard to erase. Later, as the night wound down, I found myself standing with Grandpa beneath the glowing chandeliers. He took my hand in his grip warm, his eyes soft. "Chloe," he said, "remember this. Power fades, money disappears, but dignity is eternal. If you carry that, you'll never be poor." I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "I'll remember, Grandpa. I promise." As the guests began to leave, Richard lingered in the corner, ignored, avoided, a shadow of the man who had strutted in hours earlier. And I realized then, this day wasn't just Madison's wedding. It was the day pride was stripped bare, and true worth was revealed. And in that revelation, the Carter family would never be the same again.